Hello, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're all having an excellent day. My name is Marco Valdez, and today I'll be your host during this trip through history. And because of my final evidence of the curse, I will have the honor to present you my presentation, in which I'll talk about several important events and concepts of the last decades. With now all set, let's begin. First, I will briefly describe some important events of the last decades, specifically from the crisis of the socialist bloc until today, the digital era. The first event that I will talk about is the German Reunification. This event started in March of 1990 and finally concluded in the midnight of October 3rd, 1990, when the Eastern German Republic was successfully annexed to the Federal German Republic of the West. The German reunification was the unification of the two parts of Germany, since after the World War II it was divided into the East and West. This subsequently led to a series of protests, finally concluding with the Eastern Federal German Republic legally annexing to the other half of the country, the Federal German Republic of the West, which marked a before and after for the rest of the European nations. Next, I will talk about the dissolution of the USSR, an event that started in March 11, 1990, and it subsequently ended in December 26, 1991. The dissolution of the USSR is known for being the disintegration of the federal political structures and the central government of the USSR, culminating in the independence of the 15 republics that were part of the Soviet Union, and with the disappearance of the Union, leading to the final collapse of the USSR, paving the way for the creation of the Russian Federation. The Persian Gulf War. This next event started in January 17, 1991, and it just ended 1 month later, in February 28, 1991. This conflict started when Saddam Hussein, president and dictator of Iraq, decided to invade its neighbor, Kuwait, with the one and only aim of acquiring that nation's large oil reserves, canceling a large debt Iraq owed Kuwait, in this way expanding Iraqi power in the region. At the end of the war, thanks to the participation of the USA and the use of military force, it postured itself as the new and unquestionable global leader, surpassing the Soviet Union, who was dying a slow death and was agonizing over its losses and on the brink of disappearance. Now, the next event may not be a war, but it definitely marked our digital era. I'm talking about the web becomes available for everyone. This revolutionary event occurred in April 30, 1993. During the year of 1993, the World Wide Web announced that it was open for anybody as a public domain. The main reason of this was done mainly because of the European Organization for Nuclear Research, or the CERN, which took the decision of putting the web for public use, becoming the first royalty-free, easy-to-use means of browsing the emerging information network. It's important to note that even though the web, just like we know it, was invented in 1989 by CERN, it wasn't for public use until 1993, having a very limited mainstream utility. Subsequently, the web would further increase the popularity of the internet by giving it not only a more developed use but also organizing information. Now, with all sense of respect, I will talk about the terrorist attacks of the Twin Towers, a catastrophic and misfortune event which occurred in September 11, 2001. It was a series of devastating attacks associated with the growth of religious radicalism and terrorism, in which Islamic extremist group Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 airplanes and carried out suicide attacks against the targets in the USA, in which 2 of the planes were flown into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. As the evacuation of the tower and its twin got underway, television cameras broadcasted live images of what initially appeared to be a freaky accident. This terrorist attack subsequently caused the American giant launched an invasion first of Afghanistan and later in Iraq. Now, I will talk about several terms that have had an impact in current decades. Globalization is the process by which businesses or other organizations develop international influence or start operating and impacting on an international scale, in this way promoting and increasing the interactions between different regions and populations around the globe. This concept is also used in order to describe the growing interdependence of the world's economies, cultures, and populations brought about by cross-border trade in goods and services, technology, and flows of investment, among others. Reflecting in this way the continuing expansion and mutual integration of market frontiers. In a globalized economy, countries usually specialize in the products and services they have a competitive advantage in order to produce and provide most efficiently, with the least amount of resources at a lower cost. In this way, production is more efficient within a worldwide panorama. Next up, I will talk about terrorism. Terrorism is a phenomenon of great transcendence that has marked the last few years in our history. Terrorism is defined as the calculated, systematic, and unlawful use of violence and intimidation in order to generate a general climate of fear in the population, and thereby to bring about a particular political, social, or even ideological objectives. As I mentioned earlier, probably one of the most catastrophic terrorist attacks of the last century are the terrorist attacks of the Twin Towers, a terrible event who marked many. Now, I will talk about the unipolar world. Unipolarism is the concentration of power in one single polar or country, in this case USA, being a form of world order that was imposed at the end of the bipolar epoch and hegemony. Is a domain exercised by a certain world power that is capable of organizing, articulating, and enforcing the general rules of the system in function of its necessities and priorities. In this case, usually the term unipolar world is used, since US is the superpower responsible for influencing the rest of the nations, and even though it doesn't have an absolute power over the entire world, it's a major player in international affairs, virtually having control over other countries. It's important to take into account that usually the event that is considered as the turning point in history responsible for the transition of a new world order is the dissolution of the USSR, putting an end to bipolarism, which left a great void in power that began to be filled up by the United States of America with the New World Order, unipolarism. As a result, it marked the last 3 decades of our history. Finally, as our last concept, we have the digital era. The digital era is known for being a period in human history characterized by the 21st century shift from traditional industry to an economy based on information and communication technology, ICT, in which digital technologies play a fundamental role in shaping up and regulating the behaviors, performances, standards of societies, communities, organizations, and their individuals. The digital era is the current era in which digitalization is predominant and is accompanied with several inventions and innovations that marked several decades. Some of them are the television, the telephone and cell phone, the computers, and probably one of the most important ones of them all, the internet, becoming a monumental platform for converting information of any type. And thanks to its global reach, it led to a revolution in the way we communicate, work, and even the way that we study. Also, the digital era is defined from being an era based on well-controlled population growth, food supply management, environmental sustainability, management of energy sources, and the shortage of non-renewable energies. Now, I will talk about several questions related to the terms that we previously saw. The first question is, why did globalization emerge? First of all, we have to understand that globalization is not a new phenomenon. The world economy has become increasingly interdependent for a long time, with the emergence of blocs like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the consolidation of the Bretton Woods institutions, promoting the intensifying of the principle known as interdependence. This subsequently created that the nations depend on each other in economic, political, and cultural terms. In recent decades, the process of globalization has accelerated increasingly, mainly because of a variety of factors. The most important ones include improved trade, improved transport, increased labor, the demographic growth, capital mobility, and improved technology, which is undoubtedly very influential in helping globalization. Without technologies such as the internet and global communication, it would not have been possible to witness the increased interdependence of companies and countries. In the same way, globalization would arise from a necessity, where countries would exchange their products, thus contributing to the economy and even reinforcing the trust, which years ago had been destroyed with the amount of conflicts and wars. What caused the terrorist attacks of the 20th century? First of all, we have to understand that terrorism is not new. However, since the 20th century, there has been an increase in terrorist attacks all around the world, which subsequently resulted in the increase of the fear of terrorism. One main reason that can cause terrorism, especially during the 20th century, were the multiple economic problems as an aftermath of the wars, resulting in poverty, since people that were deprived of certain resources and opportunities created a resentment, causing some to turn to terrorism in order to express their outrage. Also, certain political factors like government repression may lead to terrorism, especially when political rights and civilian rights are transgressed. Human rights abuses would also fall in this category, since this is a direct result of government action and would then be considered a form of repression. Human rights violations, including depositions and humiliations, result in people having severe grievances against the government, in this way leading to a rebellion that can end up in terrorism. How does the end of the Cold War relate with the unipolar world? Firstly, during the Cold War, the world was under a world order known as bipolarism, which is the distribution of power in which two countries have the majority of economic, military, and cultural influence, in this case, internationally. As we know, one of the major consequences that the Cold War left was the dissolution of the USSR, being next to the United States the only superpowers around the world. It is thus that with the triumph of the US, it would become the only superpower present around the world. This is the main reason of why it would cause the change from bipolarism to unipolarism, since there was only one powerful nation left with the ability to influence the rest of the nations around the globe. And once again, the global dynamics changed in a dramatic fashion. In simple words, the end of the Cold War was responsible for establishing a new world order by the hands of the only superpower that was left, the United States of America. Finally, how has the digital era influenced today's society? First of all, thanks to modernization, various innovations arrived, which would leave the door open to public to be used. Subsequently, the world traveled through a process of unprecedented technological advances. Just like I mentioned earlier, this era will be characterized by the massive use of technology around the world, which would be available to everyone, directly impacting their lives, practically making life easier for those who use it. With these technological advances, we are now able to do various tasks in a more efficient way than before, impacting us on the way that we transport and above all in the way that we communicate. In this case, possibly one of the most important innovations not only of this era but also of the last century is the internet, and this era will be directly marked in that, giving us access to information at a 24-hour rate, having access to almost anything online, being almost like a worldwide library on your pocket. Also, the internet facilitated us the way of communicating and even the way of working and studying, something that we have proven during this pandemic. The impact of technology is always associated with achieving greater freedom. However, it has also pushed us to levels of distraction and dependence that have changed how we engage with the world.